Hello, my friends. Welcome back to the Non-Toxic Environment Show. This is your host, Andy Pace. On today's episode, I'm talking with Ryan Riedy, president of Square One Restorations in Arizona. Ryan is a mold asbestos remediation contractor, fire and water damage cleanup contractor. But Ryan actually got his start in doing remodeling, house flips, investment properties. And interesting story, Ryan actually developed chronic inflammatory response syndrome himself from everything he's been exposed to in his career. And so we have a great conversation today talking about traditional mold remediation projects and what is now called MIR, medically important remediation, specifically for people who have extreme chronic health issues, and how the processes are different between just traditional mold remediation and then the medically important remediation. So I think you'll enjoy today's conversation. It's very eye-opening. It's a lot to take in, a lot to learn, but I think you'll very much appreciate it. Thanks for joining. Now, before you watch the video, please hit the like button and subscribe to this channel to make sure you can see every episode of the Non-Toxic Environment Show as it comes out. Here's Ryan. Hey, Ryan, it's great to have you on the show today.
Hey, Andy, thanks for having me.
So you and I met, or sort of met, at the CIRSX conference. I know both of our companies were there, and obviously the entire scope of that conference is chronic inflammatory response, surviving mold, and then our parts in this equation, mine from the consultation standpoint with the consumers, and yours from a restoration remediation standpoint. Mm-hmm. And so it's first off, it's good to see a company like yours really focusing on that and from the learning more about the medical standpoint of what these clients are going through.
Sure. Yeah, it's so I sort of landed in this world in the CIRSX. I got invited to it by Dr. Dorninger in 2024, just from a happenstance conversation with a good buddy of mine, and his wife's a naturopath, and we never really considered that angle. And she's like, "You got to talk to this guy, Dr. D." And so he calls me and he's like, "You need to go to this conference and see what we're doing here, because I think you could help a lot of people." So that's kind of how I got involved. And I was like, all right, let's do it. And looking at it from just a remediation perspective. And I go there and I'm sitting through these lectures and listening to these people talk about how CIRS is affecting their lives. And it just started feeling like too familiar. And I just kept thinking, okay, that sort of, I can identify with that symptom and that symptom. And I talked to Dr. D after, and he's like, yeah, it sounds a little CIRSy. And a few months later, I got diagnosed with CIRS, and that's how I really dove into the medically important remediation and sort of built out our protocol for that, which has opened my eyes to a lot of things in this industry.
For sure. And, first, Dr. D can be very persuasive, can't he? When he's like, you should come to this conference, meaning you really need to come to this conference.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he's a great speaker, and he really makes everything so easy to understand, the way he explains it. So I really appreciated his angle on it.
Without a doubt. And so, stepping back a little bit about your background, I mean, you got your start really in construction, right? Doing the new builds or remodeling?
Yeah, so initially it was, I bought my first house to flip. I got into real estate investment, and we were doing flips in Old Town Scottsdale, South Scottsdale area, mostly 1960s, 1970s homes, Hallcraft brick homes. And as soon as I dove into it, I started to see all the shortcomings of, flippers that have the bad reputation. And our first budget was like a lipstick remodel, maybe 60 grand. But I was seeing all the problems with these older homes, ungrounded electrical, poorly insulated, cast iron plumbing, just basically everything. So for people to come and spend a bunch of money remodeling over all these issues, I just couldn't do it. And so we went from spending 60 grand to 250 on the same project, but totally redeveloping that house, updating all the systems, HVAC, electrical, plumbing, underground, and making it, more of a modern house without cutting any corners. And we got kind of known for our semi-custom builds in South Scottsdale, where we developed some floor plans. People would come in and pick some finishes, and then we would execute the plan. And so I ended up getting licensed. I'm a KB1 general contractor, and that's kind of how we got started. But we were doing these old 1960s houses, and this is what benefited me in the industry is those houses had every problem you've ever seen. So they had terrible termite damage, they had asbestos in them, they had millions of roof leaks, cast iron collapsed lines. So I've kind of seen all that stuff and all the DIY improvements behind the walls that you can think of.
Sure.
So when we're looking at a property from a water damage or mold, moisture intrusion perspective, understanding how the building is put together makes a huge difference as far as diagnosing the issue and try to make sure it doesn't happen again. Because the IEPs generally point us, let's look more into this area. But then we kind of have to figure out, okay, why did it happen and how to prevent it.
Yeah, it's interesting that I tell clients all the time when they're planning a remodeling project, because the question always is, well, should I just remodel existing or build from scratch? And I typically tell people to build from scratch because then I can choose each and every product that goes into that house.
Sure.
When you're remodeling existing, every time you start to take down a wall, you're peeling the layers of an onion, and you get to see somewhat the history of that home by the layers that you're taking off, but you never know the history exactly. But that must have been key information that you used when you decided to get into the strictly restoration business, because you saw these homes and what they went through, and you kind of know now, here's what I'm looking for. So I'm curious to hear about that.
Yeah, so kind of like I mentioned with diagnosing the problems, having that background of taking things apart, you understand better how the problems occur. And so we've had some crazy ones, where they'll have a AC condensate line on a package unit on the roof, and the condensate line is piped into the sewer vent. And so in Arizona, your P-trap on your condensate line is going to be dry a lot in the summer, and that creates a vacuum going into the AC unit, and they're pulling that straight from the sewer gas of the vent. So you see those kinds of things. And then when it turns off, it'll have a release, and sometimes there's a leak. We had this one where the plumber put the vent in and just missed by an inch. So there's just a complete inch missed. And so that vacuum would happen when the AC was on in the summer and the condensate was piped in. When it turns off, that vacuum releases and it dumps a bunch of condensate. And so that would just go straight into the wall. And that was kind of a crazy one, that we figured out eventually, because I'm like, all right, let's take a step back. Like, how is water getting into the vent above all the fixtures?
Right.
And looked at the condensate line, coming through. So you see the craziest things when people start doing DIY or have contractors that just simply don't know the impact or unintended consequences of what they're doing.
Right. And while, most places around the country will have a building code, when these projects were done, was there anybody there to actually enforce these codes, to provide guidance? Probably not. And so, as you say, it's a lot of this is kind of a slap together DIY, and it may be fine for the current occupant, but once you start to see years down the road, and you're just kicking this can down the road, it can become a real nightmare.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's tough when a sensitive individual goes into these homes, especially older homes, like you're saying, because it's layer after layer of who knows what happened, and then you're faced with the question of, do I remodel or do I start over? And remodel, you have to go almost back to stud in those situations, because one thing just leads to another, and then all of a sudden you're tearing the house apart, way beyond your initial scope. So I agree, if you're going to do a remodel, in the sensitive individual world, you have to at least peel back the layers so you can address the potential major issues like cracked sewer lines and sewer gas coming in, prior leaks, bad shower pans, all those type of things that happen behind the scenes where you just can't really tell.
Well, and as our listeners know, that most of the people who watch this show are folks who have SIRS or MCAS
Mm-hmm.
or chemical sensitivities, Lyme disease, a whole host of immune disorders.
Sure.
And one of the biggest issues we have is managing anxiety levels,
Mm-hmm.
because anxiety levels that essentially triggers this fight or flight response within the body, and it's almost impossible to heal in a space where you're constantly being aggravated
Concern.
by that anxiety. And so
Mm-hmm.
sometimes doing the extra work during the remodel, even though it turns out that it wasn't necessary due to issues within the walls, but sometimes opening
Right.
up the walls is the very best thing you can do, even if there's nothing in there that you had to remediate, because it's
Yep.
peace of mind, and peace of mind is just as or more valuable than what you put into that cost of that process.
100%. And unfortunately, I have a lot of perspective on that. Having gone, or I'm in the middle of the shoemaker protocol right now. I mean, I'm knee deep in it, and you constantly have unintended exposures, or you're just so much more aware now. So you're the guy that walks into the house and, like, you're a guest somewhere, and you're like, oh man, this is a little squirrely, but
Mm-hmm.
you start to worry about things, and that anxiety is a real thing. I just had something happen in my house. We just got it all dialed in. We got our Hermes back. Like, everything's looking great. Moving on to working on Marcons, starting to feel a little better. And then I remodeled my whole house 2 years ago, but in the master closet, we left this one light fixture, and we're like, we'll get to it later. We've done everything else, and of course, I'm sleeping it's in the master bedroom, and I smell a smoke, kind of like an electrical burn smell.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, oh my God, what is that? And so what happened was that something happened with the wires on this old fixture, and they heated up, and they got sort of that electrical smoke.
Right.
And so all of my clothes were covered in this. Yeah. And so, you know, my wife's thinking about, is this a big deal? Can we put them outside and air it out? And I'm thinking about, oh my God, this is going to set me back. Cause it's an exposure, and it's just a lot heavier from perspective of being sensitive to these types of things. So we cleared the entire closet out, SPC the closet, and all the clothes are going to be, attempted to be clean, deodorized. But yeah, it's just everywhere you go, you're thinking about it, and it is tough.
It's tough. It wears on you, and for a lot of those who are listening right now, it feels like there's it's this deep hole you can't get out of. But that's why I do the show, is to talk about
Mm-hmm.
the ways we can get out of this and move on
Sure.
to get back to life, not necessarily life before SIRS, but life with SIRS, and
Right.
managing expectations and managing the exposures. I want to get into, of course, I want to get into mold and the medically important restorations, but I'd like to talk a little bit first about some of the other types of work you do, because even though the last 5 years, mold and bacteria have been probably the number one topic with all of my consulting
Right.
clients that I deal with around the world. Uh, there are still issues with things like asbestos and lead and fire and smoke cleanup and water cleanup, and
Hmm.
so first let's kind of talk about asbestos. Is this something that we are still dealing with here in this country, and uh, do you think we'll ever get to a point where we're done with it?
I think it was so. Yes, it's something we're dealing with, on an everyday basis,
Oh.
and I don't think it's going to be something that we are never dealing with because they use these products. It was great in building products, the fireproofing and the strength and such. So they put it in a lot of things. You can find it in the casing on wires, the glazing on windows, the texture on drywall, the joint tape, the mud. So we encounter it most when we're dealing with mold remediation or a flood or a fire where we have to remove a section of affected material. And you don't abate the whole home, you perform an asbestos abatement on the affected materials. So you're still leaving a lot behind as long as it's not friable, it's not being disturbed and crushed and airborne, then it's not bothering anybody. But we see it out here a lot because a lot of Phoenix and Scottsdale was built in the 70s
Mm.
and the 60s. And so, all those homes need to get tested. And that's a big area where contractors are just totally dropping the ball because they don't know. And then they're exposing their workers to just going in swinging hammers on a house that has asbestos in the walls.
Hmm.
And so we deal with it a fair bit, and I think it's going to be a concern. And what's important for people to know is what's in the building materials before you're disturbing it. So if your home is, I would say prior to 80s, 100% make sure you get asbestos and lead testing
Hmm.
to see what's in those materials so you can remove it safely. It can be done safely and it can not cause you exposure, but it needs to be handled properly.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's information is always helpful. I get this
Hmm.
question a lot. Should we test for this or test for that? What are the chances that we're going to find this in our home? Well, I would
Right.
rather know 100% yes or no, one or the other.
Hmm.
So if you do a bunch of testing and everything comes out negative, that's fantastic, number one. And number
Yeah.
two, again, peace of mind. Now we know we don't have to be concerned about this as we go on with our restoration project.
Hmm.
My mother-in-law actually died of mesothelioma,
Oh, wow.
and she
Sorry
was
to hear that.
exposed to it when she was a child. Doing
Hmm.
her family's laundry. Her dad worked at a manufacturer
Oh, yeah.
of boilers, and they used it as boiler insulation. It takes 30 to 50 years to incubate. And so
Hmm.
it's not as if you're going to get this acute symptom of, oh, I was
Right.
exposed to asbestos. You really don't know about it until it's too late.
Sure.
And so unlike something like being exposed to VOCs or bacteria or mold, which are can be, highly acute instant reactions, they also
Right.
may take longer too. And so again, it's just peace of mind, going through the process, checking it off the list, knowing that it's not a problem now, we can move on to the next.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can, like you're saying, with peace of mind, and I didn't touch on it earlier, but that's typically how I guide someone through those difficult conversations. It's like, okay, here's what we need to remediate based on the inspection and the testing results, but it may make sense to pull this, from whatever corner to corner. And they're like, okay, well, that's got some extra cost. And so what I say to them is, if we don't pull that, are you going to wonder? You
Yeah,
don't want to be thinking about it,
right.
but let's be better safe than sorry. If we're going to all this trouble to do a, airtight remediation, small particle cleaning, let's try to be as sure as possible
Right.
before you go through all of it. Um, so
Yeah,
yeah, I
it's
think that's
it's it's
important.
kind of a people think they're wasting money if they do extra tests, or you
Mm,
open up a wall larger than what you think you need to open it up. And
right.
my perspective is it's not a waste of money. Again, it's peace of mind. It's why not know for
Yeah.
sure because you don't want to have this problem come back and come back even worse because it wasn't addressed early enough. And so
100%.
you had mentioned earlier that you yourself developed SIRS, and I'm kind of curious if you can trace that back to when you were doing house flipping, or is that
Yeah.
something that just developed more recently?
So it's hard to say exactly when, you're genetically susceptible. So what was the trigger?
Right.
I don't know exactly what the trigger was. I always thought like, okay, I'm getting older. I feel a little worse. Like those two just, it was a parallel path. And I
Hmm.
just accepted that until I saw, people like Mike Schranz and Dr. Doringer having those symptoms prior and now up there at the top of their game. And I'm like, man, it would be nice to feel like they're feeling. And
Hmm.
so I started to obviously take a deep dive in the environment. So we did testing, we did ERMI, endo, actino testing at my workplace and my house. And at my workplace, um, we had really high mold counts. And I'm in a 1970s warehouse that we rent, with an office in the front, warehouse in the back, and it's got a bathroom. They've done million tenant improvements here. And so we started poking around and we ended up removing probably 40 linear feet of drywall with a significant mold issue that I've been sitting in for the last 5 years, working in here and doing my thing. So that was a potential piece of the puzzle. So we cleaned that up. We small part cleaned the office. I've now made some easy improvements. Like we've got a robot vacuum that runs daily. I really love those. They remove a lot of material. And then we've got air purifiers and upgraded our filtration in the AC. So I feel like that became a safe space. And then going to the house, uh, our ERMIs weren't terrible.
Hmm.
And I'm like, there's no way I have a mold problem, with the context that I have. And so I'm looking at everything, can't find anything. And then I go in the garage and it just clicks. And we bought the house a few years ago. There's one of those laundry tub slop sinks in the garage.
Hmm.
And then my air handler is right next to it. And when we bought the house, the supply lines weren't connected to the sink or anything. They must have had some problem. And I never dealt with it. And so we just sort of used it as like a storage space, of course. And I should have known better. But basically, sewer gas was coming up from the sink and going into my air conditioning unit and spreading it around downstairs. And our downstairs endotoxin was quite high. So we did the smoke test to confirm that. And sure enough, smoke coming right out and going in right above the filter. There was some leaking there. So I think that was my main exposure, which really took things downhill, was going to be long-term sewer gas and endotoxin exposure, and then potentially the mold in the office too. So I think that's likely what triggered it. And what I saw was just a decline in focus for sure. So the brain fog,
Hmm.
all the walking in rooms and forgetting what you're doing constantly, and then having sort of a short, no patience, because I was having migraine joint pain and those types of things where it's just like you're irritable
Right.
all the time. And, waking up at night, having to go to the bathroom because of the ADH crashes. And so all those things I just had sort of accepted as normal aging.
Hmm.
I'm just getting old. I'm late 30s now. I'm falling apart. This is just how it goes. But that's not the deal. And honestly, I'm feeling a lot better now. Just being
Wonderful.
removed from exposure helps a lot. And then we're going through Shoemaker and trying to clear some of this stuff out.
Hmm.
So I'm able to go to the gym again and start kind of doing things I love doing.
Excellent. Excellent. So you actually brought up two sort of myths that you've dispelled, which is number one,
Mhm.
people who live in Arizona or people who maybe live outside of Arizona think, well, it's impossible to get mold in Arizona. It's not wet enough. Well,
Yeah.
that's completely false.
Completely false. It's a total misnomer. So the thing is, yes, it's dry outside, and you're not going to have, I suppose, more moldy things growing outside. But inside, you still have your AC condensate leaks, your water heater leaks, your slow drips, all the things that are conducive to mold.
Hmm.
And so the food is there. The drywall paper is going to be a great source. It's stuck in a wall cavity with a constant leak, and you're going to get mold issues.
I kind of think that because it's been sort of out of sight, out of mind, and people just assume because you live in a dry climate, mold's not going to be an issue. Therefore, I think the construction and remodeling methods that have been employed over the years doesn't really take that in consideration, and it's
Mm-hmm.
probably it's like sticking your head in the sand. I mean, the problem is there. It's just if you don't believe it's there, you may not take
Right.
the precautions necessary that we all do in these, in damper climates.
Yeah. And I mean, certainly with the drier climate and warmer climate, you're not going to have as much environmentally caused
Hmm.
issues like elevated humidity and such. You don't have 60% humidity in your houses here. That's just not a
Hmm.
thing. And so less maybe condensation related environmental mold, but you still have your leaks and your drips that lead to uh, growth issues.
And I think too, because you are in the climate you're at, nobody has a basement.
Right.
So therefore, a lot of times your HVAC is either up in the attic or in a garage,
Mm-hmm.
which means there are issues with, bringing in either mold spores or bacteria from those areas that can get transferred around the house.
Sure.
If there's a leak in the condensate line, there could be bacteria buildup in the drip pan. These are things that like we necessarily don't deal with much in the colder, wetter climates,
Mm-hmm.
but we deal with the other issues, from the outside. So just I guess the overall theme here is that don't think that because you're in a drier climate that mold is not an issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is here, because of the drier climate, your ACs don't produce a ton of condensation generally.
Yeah.
But then we have a monsoon season where all of a sudden we've got a bunch of humidity, and what's been collecting dust for the last 7 months is
Hmm.
now dumping buckets of water,
Right.
and those get clogged, and then your secondary pan gets engaged and it's probably clogged, and so
Hmm.
that leads to leaks or things kind of growing in there which can be problematic. So
Hmm.
yeah, you gotta look at everything, and it certainly does occur.
Yeah, great point, Ryan. So the second myth that you had mentioned that I think you've also dispelled is for those who are maybe new to SIRS and
Mhm.
those who are new to mold problems in the home. I think it's more so it's a biotoxin issue, and
Mhm.
so what I'm talking about is SIRS is not always because of mold exposure, correct? It's
100%.
because of biotoxins such as sewer gas, bacteria, and so forth. So, in the last 10 years, terms like SIRS and MCAS had just barely started its use. And,
Right.
and so I think, generally speaking, people who listen to this podcast understand what SIRS is. MCAS is something that's sort of starting to become on, I don't want to say on the radar, but on the tip of the tongue. But now
Right.
things like actinos, the bacteria exposures, this
Mhm.
is now starting its own conversation. And so, touch on that a little bit too, because and this will probably bring us in the conversation of the medically important restorations and as a restoration contractor exactly what you were looking for in order to achieve those goals.
Sure. So yeah, and I've had clients where they have a great ERMI, like an ERMI someone would kill for,
Hmm.
and but they're really sick, and it's like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
And so you have to look at the whole picture, and a lot of times that's endotoxin and then the actinobacteria. And so the actinos are related to your skin biome, but then you shed that and it gets in the dust. And then one thing that I realized through my personal experience was the drains in your house are reservoirs for bacteria.
Mm.
And it could be actinobacteria, it could be endotoxin producing bacteria. And so what we've added to our scope is cleaning the drains, from basically your drain to the P-trap water. Because if you go look in your drain, it's gnarly. I don't care who you are. You probably don't clean it properly or often enough. And when you get an odor from your drain and the P-trap's full of water, it's not sewer gas, it's VOCs from bacteria.
Mm-hmm.
And so cleaning that has become part of our protocol, because prior to that, when you're doing remediation, you cover and exclude areas, and one of those is the drains. So you contain out the drains, you do your remediation, and then you remove the containment, and now you're exposing the environment again. So we've added that piece into it. Also, because when you're dealing with actinos, you're shedding, and that gets to the drains, and it's on your body, and it's in your dust. So there's this reciprocal loop, where we've got to break it. So cleaning the house and addressing your body may help reduce actino exposure. And drains could be considered as a potential source of endotoxin too. So I think that's an important piece that may get missed when you're only looking at mold.
Certainly. So explain for us the difference between I'll call it a common mold remediation project, and then a mold remediation project where you incorporate the medically important restoration.
Sure. So all proper remediation includes engineering controls, so you've got containments and you've got negative air pressure, scrubbers, etc. You're doing things with the goal of not contaminating other areas. So you're properly suiting up. The guys are wearing PPE, going in and focused on removal. And traditionally, you use chemicals to aid. So you're using things like peroxide and whatnot to help get you through it. And then you clean up the environment. A lot of times there's something called a HEPA sandwich. So HEPA wipe, HEPA. When you're dealing with people with environmental sensitivities like SIRS and others, the fragments can be inflammatory. And you have to focus on only removal and not chemically destroying anything. Because when you chemically destroy, the fragments can release toxins that are inflammatory to people. So it's a lot more steps. So the engineering controls on the front end are fairly similar, but then there's no HEPA sandwich because HEPA can't stop everything. And so the thought is you do your removal, your initial cleaning. Your initial cleaning is elbow grease, brushes, sanders. And so you're using soap and water to clean instead of any harsh chemicals. And so it takes more time. It's a bit more work, but the studs still clean up very well. And then you get on to the small particle clean or environmental clean inside your containment. So the steps we do, we HEPA vac detailed. We do a wet wipe with soap and water. And typically it's going to be 7th generation or branch basics, about 5-6 drops per 32 ounce. Wipe everything down. And then we go on to another wet wipe, which is going to be ethyl alcohol diluted to 5%. After that, we do 2 rounds of dry wipe. The dry wipe is with a unscented Swiffer cloth, essentially, electrostatic cloth. And that's going to, you use the HEPA vac in the beginning to remove as much as you can, but then you're focused on cleaning through lifting and removing. And it's going to target the small particles and the fragments, and you're going to get it extremely clean. So that's the main difference.
So obviously a lot more labor intensive,
Yes.
a lot more time involved. So obviously the cost is much more. But for those folks who do suffer from SIRS, this is the protocol, because otherwise you're just exacerbating the issues.
Yeah, or you're hiring someone that goes in, tears it out, shoots it with a biocide, leaves a bunch of fragments there, and then you're calling us after to redo it, and you're paying twice. So
Correct.
Yeah, that's the tricky part, is finding people with the context. And there was something that happened to me probably 2 years ago we'd been doing remediations for years, and this woman calls me and she's like, hey, I've got a mold problem. We had someone come in from California. We've got this extensive testing. We need to remediate. And I was like, okay, here's our process, set up containment, HEPA sandwich, et cetera. She's like, you're not getting it. And I'm like, I think I get it. I've been doing this a while, doing remediation, and we ended up not doing that job. And then when I was at the conference in 2024, listening to one of the talks about how people are constantly told, you're not looking in the right place, or your doctors are kind of pushing back traditionally. And I'm like, dang it, I was that guy telling this woman, like, hey, this is the way to do it, when what she needed was the small particle clean. And 2 years later, I called her back and she didn't pick up, but I left a message and I was like, hey, I'm really sorry. Like, I now know what you were looking for, and we're providing that, if it ever comes up and you need it. But I just simply lacked the context. And so it's not that people are doing things intentionally wrong or cutting corners. It's just a whole nother set of a skill set to handle this type of job. And on top of that, like you were saying, you're dealing with people that are very anxious about this process, and a lot of times have already rammed their head into all the walls, and now they're coming to you to help guide them through it. Mm-hmm. And there's just not that many people with the context yet. So that's kind of one thing SURSEX is doing with the training, and trying to give people exposure to this, that's doing it well. And that's the reason why I'm involved and why I'm working on healing with SURS.
Yeah, mold remediation around the country is still the Wild West. And that's when you're talking about just the general type of remediation work. What you're discussing, medically important remediation, the small particle cleaning, this is like the very small but ever-growing process of mold remediation. And so we're just trying to get, I'm involved in the on the board of directors of the Change the Air Foundation, and we're just trying to get the construction industry to at least adopt just a set of standards for traditional remediation, just so we got a equal playing field around the country.
Baseline. Yeah,
exactly. And now we can start to focus on this real detail for those who really need it. And it just based upon the folks that I've talked to and I've met over the last couple of years, I think more and more people need this, but just don't realize it because they don't have, a shoemaker, a trained MD in their area who can tell them this is what the issue is and here's how you need to deal with it.
Yeah, and those are hard to find too, and we need more of them. There's one shoemaker certified doc in our state here, Dr. Jen, and then there's a couple proficiency partners. So there's a few people that have the relevant knowledge, and of course there's other camps and people that deal with mold exposure. But I think just getting the word out about how this is affecting people and the path to get through it, it starts with removing yourself from exposure, no matter who you're talking to. And so that's where the medically important remediation comes in. And there are pieces of it that, it's very expensive because of the time involved in detail cleaning something 5 times. And that's just a small particle clean. Prior to that, you've already cleaned it several times for the remediation and such. And so, we'll have 600 plus hours in a job, 3,000 Swiffers and, 2,000 rags. And it's like, I can't do that any cheaper, but this is what, the guys at the top put their heads together and said, this is the protocol that will help reduce the exposure to a level that supports healing.
Well, and at some point you say, what is your health worth? And so we hope that as this gets researched more and more, and we learn more about this and about how it's actually working on these projects, maybe we come to a point where we start to develop less expensive ways to do this so that more people can be healed. But, time will tell for that.
Right.
You had mentioned something before I just wanted to touch on. We were talking about when you're doing traditional remediation can leave mold fragments.
Hmm.
Now, mold fragments, is that different than mycotoxins? And if yes or no, how do we deal with those two separate issues?
That would be a better question for Dr. D.
Okay.
Yeah. So as far as that, I don't get too into the mycotoxin versus fragments because it's
Okay.
not my area of expertise. Now, if you want me to remove it to the best of my ability, that's where we, come in. And we think this
Sure.
protocol um, handles the fragments to a level where it's going to support healing.
Yeah.
It's impossible to. I mean, no one lives in a clean room.
Hmm.
You can't remove everything, and there's mold in the air, at all times. And so it's about reducing it to a level that supports, your body's ability to heal.
Right.
And yeah, so that's kind of what we're focused on. And as far as the efficacy of traditional remediation versus the medically important remediation, the clearance standards are extremely elevated. So when you're doing a post remediation clearance, typically it's just an air sample. You're getting an air sample inside the containment, you're getting an air sample outside, you're comparing the two. Is it at least, as safe as walking outdoors? And is there no suspect, celebrity molds in there? And on a phase one clearance post remediation verification, it's a lot more intensive. And they're doing dust wipes for direct exam as well. So they're not just checking for what's in the air, which is a snapshot in time and has limitations that I'm sure you're aware of, but they're dust wiping to see, okay, what has settled as well, because that's kind of the purpose of the small particle clean, is to get small particles that could settle and cause issues. So
So those dust tests are being done after you do the small particle cleaning.
So it depends on what the IEP is spec'd out with the client, but after you do your remediation, before you pull the containment, in some cases, you're typically going to do a phase one clearance test inside the containment
Got
to
it.
say, okay, it's clean enough for that to come down and you proceed. And so they're doing the air sample and the dust wipe to make sure you did your job appropriately.
Okay.
And
So
there's no hiding. You cannot, like, if you weren't thorough, guess what? You're cleaning it again.
sure.
You know.
And so let's kind of play this out a bit. Let's say there was a uh, uh, mold problem that happened in the laundry room because of a water leak,
Okay.
and you've contained it to that space, and you've done the remediation, you've done the small particle cleaning, you've cleared that room, those spaces, those surfaces from being completely clear of
Hmm.
the problem. Are you also then doing a small particle cleaning of the rest of the home because of possible exposure? Or is that also something the IEP maybe will take put their 2 cents worth and say, maybe we don't need to do this because based upon my air test, I don't see it
Right.
traveling anywhere?
Yeah. So it depends on the scope of the inspection, really, and the budget of the client. So
Mm,
if they've done the testing in the whole home to determine that there has been communication from the issue in the laundry room, they'll recommend an environmental cleaning, and so we would small particle clean in that case. Sometimes somebody doesn't have that information and they're like, let's just stop the bleeding. I
yeah.
know there's a mold issue here. Let's attack that. And then if you stop the bleeding, when you're cleaning, you're reducing the mess, So even if you have to do it yourself and you're just going to say, okay, every 3 weeks I'm going to deep clean my house
Hmm.
and there's no other sources, your biotoxin load's going to improve. Over time, it's going to become a better situation if you can't afford to do, the turnkey, because it's pretty difficult for people, because it's like, okay, you had a in-depth inspection, you've got 7 remediation areas, and then you need a small particle clean. Now someone has to move out of their house, deal with the contents while we remediate these areas and small particle clean the entire home.
Hmm.
So it can be a tough pill to swallow. So depends on the client and the information available. Are we just going in to stop the bleeding? and we can advise them on the small particle cleaning. Hey, here's, the steps we would take to eventually reduce it. And then you can retest, or are we going to handle it start to finish and, guarantee your phase one clearance?
Well, and you had mentioned before, and we talk about this on every episode. It seems that we can't strive for perfection because there is no such thing. We have to strive
Yep.
for tolerance, a healing space, because every
Mm-hmm.
client is going to be different. Every project is different. We have to get it to a point where, at least based upon the testing that has been done, it is now medically cleared to be a healing space. And again, bring down the anxiety, bring down the stress, so that you can get into that healing mode.
Right.
But understand that mold and bacteria are naturally found outside. At some point, you're going to have to open your door and walk outside, and so
Yeah.
you can't be completely sealed away from that.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, doing the small particle clean and the remediation, it gets you back to, square one, if
Hmm.
you will.
Right,
And then you got to focus on maintenance. And there's
right.
DIY things you can do for the maintenance, because now you've got that clean and safe environment. You need to keep it clean and safe. And so I mentioned a couple of them earlier, but um, we have one dog and two kids. And somehow every single day, the floor just has all kinds of stuff on it. And so we have a robot vacuum that runs every morning, and the amount of stuff it has in its little tank is incredible at the end of the week. And I really like those for maintenance. And then obviously air purifiers, but air purifiers have limitations too. You're not
Hmm.
going to put one in your house and cover 2,500 square feet.
Right.
And so, like we learned from Greg Weatherman in his class at Surzex, is capture zones exist, and those are limitations on the air it processes. So if you have purifiers, move them around the house.
Right.
And so maybe every 2 weeks or so, move it from the living room to the kitchen, and that type of thing. And then a big one for me too, because I have all the gadgets. I'm in the industry, so I was doing particulate testing and such in my house, and we increased our mechanical filtration using an April Air system, which is
Hmm.
basically a giant MIR 16 filter, and that reduced the airborne particulate significantly. And so, if someone can afford to do that, that's high up on my
Yeah.
list, because that's going to reduce what's floating around while the air is running. And you can manipulate that a bit, because you can run your fan continuously. You can set it to run certain hours per day or minutes per hour, and that's going to help filter the air pretty effectively. Because if you've got an air scrubber or purifier just sitting there, it's going to get this little bubble. Your air conditioning has all these arms that go out to each room and provide positive pressure there, and then it brings it back to the unit. So it's pretty effective at disturbing and scrubbing, but you have to have that base of good filtration,
Yes.
and that's where the April Air and the MERV 16 I think helps a lot.
Yeah, I don't have a project that I work on around the country where I don't recommend a whole house purification system.
Yeah.
And I've been selling portables for years, and as
Mm-hmm.
well as whole house. I think they both have their place. A portable that might be rated for 1,500 square feet is fine if it's one room that's 1,500 square feet with no
Yep.
walls.
Sure.
And not to mention, you got to have airflow in that space. Otherwise, you're not going to get particles from every nook and cranny of that room through that purifier.
Right.
Uh, Same thing is true with a whole home purification system. If you live in a house that has one giant return because
Mm-hmm.
your HVAC is up in the attic and you have a 2 foot by 2 foot return in the hallway, you're not going to get as good of air movement and air purification as you would if you had returns in the four corners of the house and maybe a few others mixed
Right.
in. And so this is where even some the simple things like running fans around in the house for air
Mm-hmm.
movement helps tremendously. You get rid of these pockets of stale dead air, which can be
Yep.
problematic. So again, these they seem like little things to do, putting a fan in a room, but it makes a big difference ultimately when
It
to
does.
improve the indoor air quality.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's something we employ when we're doing the cleanings too. So in Mike Schrantz's protocol, he has us do 8 air changes per hour,
Mm.
and so we use quite a few scrubbers, and then we can use fans to agitate the air as well. So you're doing kind of an aggressive air wash. You're trying to kick everything up, and filter it out as sort of a early stage part of the cleaning.
So the typical mold remediation project versus a medically important project. I'm not want to talk about cost because it's obviously varied tremendously
Yeah,
from job to job,
sure.
but time wise, I would assume that the MIR is going to be 4 to 5 times the length of time involved in the process.
Yeah, so I mean the remediation portion of it alone is probably about twice as long. And then when you get to the small particle clean of the home, that step doesn't even exist in a traditional remediation.
Right.
So like I'll give you an example, we did a house that's probably about 1,800 square feet. It had about 7 remediation zones, and then we small particle cleaned the whole house. And that took 3 to 4 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah.
On the other hand, for that client who needs it, 3 to 4 weeks, it's an inconvenience, it's a cost, yes, but then look back a year from now, looking back to that project, and you'll be so thankful that you went through that because of the improvement in the space. And I think that we all have to look at that. I think, unfortunately, our society is such a instant gratification
Yeah.
society. We think that we can, I don't know, turn on an air purifier and all of our mold problems go away, or
Right. Spray
we'll just
something on it.
yeah,
Yeah.
let's just clean it off the surface. It'll be taken care of, and out of sight, out of mind. We
Right.
need to be very mindful of the symptoms that you're feeling,
Hmm.
and understand that it's, as you said before, just because you're still in your 30s. I'm in my 50s. You shouldn't feel this way. It's not
Right.
natural to
Exactly.
feel this way as you get older. It's natural for all my joints to hurt because of years of abuse,
Right. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
that whole feeling of flu-like symptoms and worse constantly,
Hmm.
that's a warning sign, and so we need to be able to listen to that.
Yeah. You got to listen to that, and you got to keep exploring and advocate for yourself. Because you try to listen to it, and you go to your primary care guy, and he goes, "All right, let's run some labs," and they do a panel for liver function, kidney function, and it looks fine. And they're like, "Well, exercise and eat better. See you later."
Hmm.
And so I had chronic sinus infections. Every time I got sick, it was followed by a sinus infection. And then I would get, my dad's a pulmonologist, he calls it reactive airways. And then I would need antibiotics, then I would need prednisone to get over this. And it would be, a month or two a lot of times. And so I went to an ENT. I'm like, I'm tired of this. He sticks a little thing in my nose, and he's like, well, it's not surgical. So, spray some of this up your nose, and
Hmm.
see you later. Let us know when we can operate on it. And
Oh,
I brought up to that guy, and I said, have you ever encountered environmental related problems that could be causing inflammation and causing the sinusitis? And it's like he just totally dismissed it. And then I felt what I heard in that conference, and I was like, okay, this is very much real. And you get a lot of pushback. Um,
mhm.
and I got pushback in my own family,
Sure.
being in the medical world. Your symptoms are non-specific. Okay, well, something's causing it. And I'm just fortunate that I went to the Sursex conference because of Dorninger, and he said I was little Sursy. So I'm glad I did that and went through the process, because now I'm starting to regain, some energy and be able to do things that I just felt too tired or frustrated to do.
Ryan, I'm sorry you are going through that and still going through it, but I'm grateful that you're able to share that not only with our listeners, but also to really use that as kind of a foundation for what you are doing professionally. So
Right.
often I talk to people who are in this industry one direction or another, and they kind of started with a similar story, like, hey, I developed a problem, or somebody in
Mhm.
my family did, and it got me thinking that there's got to be a better way for us to do this. And we're using our own various platforms to now promote these ideas and methods, hopefully hoping that those who are listening who haven't taken that first step maybe get encouraged themselves to reach out to a shoemaker protocol doctor, or
Right.
a practitioner who at least understands it and can direct you in the right way.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting how, you sort of find where you're supposed to be.
Hmm.
My family is involved in medicine. My sister's a veterinarian. My dad's a pulmonologist. And so it's always about helping people. And I kind of went a different way. I was
Hmm.
building houses and then tearing out mold,
Hmm.
but then now it's come to this arena where having a medical understanding and an ability to really help people get on the right path to heal and feel better is it's a cool place to be. And I have more context than I probably asked for, with finding out about SIRS, but that really helps people too, because they come to me with a lot of anxiety and a lot of angst towards remediators.
Hmm.
And so when I'm like, hey, I get it, guys, like I'm going through this. I just cleaned my house. I just found all these issues. I just did the 25 vials of blood or whatever it is, trying to figure it out. That can be very disarming, and, helps connect with them to where it's like, okay, he gets it. He's going to help us, and it sort of restores some trust that I think has been pretty badly beaten up with restorers that are trying to, they're doing only what they know to do because they may lack the context because you haven't been exposed to it. And without, like you're saying, a family member or a personal experience, you don't even know this world exists. And so that's why this kind of thing is so important to try to get the word out.
Exactly right. Ryan, thank you so much for being on the show today. Folks, you
Yeah, great.
can reach out to Ryan's company is Square One Restoration. That the website is squareonerestore.com, and you can learn all about what they do, what Ryan and his team does on a daily basis. I know you all work in sort of the Phoenix, Scottsdale, Arizona area, but I'll also say your website is full of information for those who even outside of that area. So I really
Thank you.
encourage you to reach out and to learn more about Ryan's company. Ryan, really appreciate you having on the show today and sharing your story.
Thanks for having me, Andy.
You
Appreciate
got
it.
it.
Talk to you soon.